Imagine lying in bed, the lights click off, and suddenly your heart is pounding. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to shine a light, pun totally intended, on one of the most universal yet deeply misunderstood human experiences out there. Today, we're unraveling the absolute mystery of nyctophobia, and we're exploring exactly what happens in those shadows of the mind.
So here's the fundamental question we really have to ask ourselves. Why on earth does your brain panic in the dark? Like, why does your mind suddenly just betray you, flooding your entire system with dread, when you are lying perfectly safe in your own home? Well, think of your brain as this incredibly powerful but honestly kind of outdated survival machine. It's basically running ancient hardware in a modern world. Throughout this explainer, we're going to unpack exactly why this biological misfire happens and, more importantly, how we can finally shut it off.
So, the absolutely crucial starting point here is understanding what we're actually dealing with. Nyctophobia is formally defined as an extreme, irrational fear of night or darkness that causes intense anxiety and, in a lot of cases, pretty severe depression. But here's the fascinating twist from the research. People with this phobia aren't actually afraid of the dark itself. No, the absence of light isn't the real trigger. Instead, it's the unseen unknown. It's that profound, chilling terror of what the darkness might be concealing from your eyes. Okay, let's dive into this. To really understand why we fear what we just can't see, we actually have to travel back in time. Researchers point to something called evolutionary preparedness. Just imagine our ancient ancestors, right? Living and sleeping out in the open on the prehistoric savanna. When the sun went down, humans were incredibly vulnerable. I mean, we don't have built-in night vision, we don't have fangs, we don't have claws. Our eyesight is honestly pretty terrible compared to the nocturnal predators that were roaming the night looking for an easy meal. So staying hyper-aware in the dark, that wasn't some anxiety disorder back then. It was an absolute necessity for survival. Simply put, if you weren't afraid of the dark, you probably didn't survive to pass on your genes. Now, I know there might be some doubting Thomases watching right now thinking, wait a minute, isn't fear just something we learn like, you have a bad experience in the dark, so you become afraid of it? Well, let me give you something to chew on. Scientists call this the non-associative perspective, and this theory suggests that you don't actually need a traumatic event or classical conditioning to fear the dark. Not at all. Evolution actually requires organisms to form fears in response to stimuli that are relevant to survival. So this fear is an innate biological preparedness that's deeply wired right into our psyches from birth. It's literally a factory setting.
Section 1. Childhood Imagination and Monsters. Let's look at how this evolutionary trait actually manifests in early childhood development.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what happens in the developing brain. This is a quote from a really fascinating study of Russian preschoolers. 4-year-old Stepan says, "In the dark, everything can be imagined because everything is black. If I approach a curtain, I can get a bit scared." By distorting our vision, the lack of visual stimuli gives children this giant blank canvas to just project their own imagination onto. So a simple ordinary curtain morphs into a lurking monster simply because the brain is desperately trying to fill in the visual gaps.
Now for young children, their ability to differentiate fantasy from reality is usually pretty solid during the daytime. But researchers note that darkness acts as this unique context where those normal rules of reality just totally break down. When they can't see, the emotional charge of their fantasies takes over completely. Suddenly, distinguishing between a fictional monster and a real physical threat becomes incredibly difficult. You know the feeling. A pile of laundry on a chair casts a weird shadow, and in the child's mind, that emotional charge kicks in, creating this vicious cycle of rising panic. Because this ancient anxiety is just so overpowering, children instinctively seek out ways to cope with and eliminate the fear. Studies show that caretakers, especially mothers, are viewed by children as the ultimate protectors, like they are the literal opposites of darkness. And in the absence of a parent, children will project those same protective qualities onto inanimate objects. It's exactly why a simple thin security blanket suddenly feels like an impenetrable suit of armor, or why physical light sources like nightlights or flashlights act as immediate shields against the unknown. Honestly, it's the exact same instinct that makes us adults want to sprint up the basement stairs after turning off the lights. Moving on to Section 2, Adult Nyctophobia and Realism. It's time to challenge the common misconception that only little kids are afraid of the dark. We so often assume that the fear of the dark is just a phase we'd naturally outgrow, but that is a massive misconception. Look at this striking data point. Up to 9% of adults in the United States suffer from this overwhelming phobia. 9%. That is literally millions of adults for whom the setting of the sun brings a daily wave of dread. It is a very real, completely hidden struggle for so many people.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark difference you see when you compare comfort levels in a daytime location versus a nighttime one. In a study of college undergrads, participants rated their comfort levels in different settings, like an alleyway or a gazebo. And the results? Massive drops in comfort during the nighttime photos. But the nature of the fear had actually changed. Adults generally aren't afraid of ghosts or monsters hiding under the bed. No, the unrealistic childhood fear transforms into a highly realistic fear of victimization and physical harm. The ancient evolutionary alarm bell is exactly the same, but the imagined threat has just been updated to match adult realities.
Section 3. When fear becomes phobia. Before we dive into this, if you or someone you know has ever felt this nocturnal panic, stick around and keep watching until the end, because the way we can rewire our brains to conquer this ancient fear is truly fascinating. So we really have to differentiate between a normal evolutionary caution and a full-blown clinical phobia. It is completely normal to feel a bit uneasy turning the lights off after watching a scary movie or, walking down a dim alleyway. But nyctophobia crosses a critical line. A phobia is excessive. It severely impacts your day-to-day life. We're talking about missing out on sleep, experiencing extreme distress at bedtime, or even going so far as avoiding social gatherings simply because they happen to be after sunset. It's that moment when the fear literally starts controlling your behavior. And the physical response here is incredibly intense. When that evolutionary fight-or-flight switch is accidentally flipped in a dark room, your body prepares for a physical battle that just isn't coming. People experience a racing heart rate and palpitations, shortness of breath, extreme dread, and even nausea or dizziness. It's a highly visceral, systemic reaction. Your brain is basically screaming that you are in mortal peril, triggering this full-body response, even when you're literally just lying in bed trying to get a peaceful night's rest. Section 4. Rewiring the anxious brain. Let's move to and see how this builds into some incredible modern clinical solutions with a really high success rate. The incredibly encouraging news from modern clinical psychology is that nyctophobia actually has an exceptionally high treatment success rate, sitting right around 80 to 90%. And the clinical solutions walk patients through a really clear narrative progression to regain cognitive control over their mind. First, it starts with cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. Here, a therapist helps challenge that catastrophic thinking, like the automatic assumption that something terrible is going to happen in the dark. You actively work to replace those negative thoughts with realistic evidence-based reasoning. Then, this is paired with exposure therapy, where patients are gradually and safely exposed to the dark. Step by step, this slowly desensitizes the brain, retraining the nervous system to finally realize that a simple lack of visual stimuli absolutely does not equal an imminent threat.
So how do we shut this false alarm off? Well, the answer brings us right back to the beginning. Your brain betrays you because it vividly remembers the ancient predators of our ancestors. It's just trying to keep you safe. But by using logic, structured therapy, and gradual exposure, you can consciously overwrite that outdated code. You start to realize that the dark is just the absence of light. That's it, nothing more. And you have the ultimate power to tell your brain that it is safe, bridging that critical gap between ancient instinct and modern reality.
Thank you to everyone for your time. We request you to revisit King's Academy for more knowledge. Please let us know your opinion in the comments section, and as always, we read all posted comments and reply as soon as possible.